Welcome everybody. My name's Lawrence Askowitz. I actually happen to be a telecom investment banker. A lot of the events that we do have nothing to do with what I do every day. I'm excited to have a session about something I'm passionate about. I love mobile. I love broadband. I love everything telecom. So it's a particularly exciting discussion today. It's, I believe, October 28th. I'm just going to make a public service announcement to everybody to go vote. Election, anyone who's a US citizen, election's just in a couple of days. Whoever you vote for, whatever state you happen to be in, just please go out and vote would be great, even if it's wet where you happen to be. This is, I'm going to make it up a number, but it's roughly our 18th event for the year for 2020. YU continues to have all of these educational webinars as an institute of higher learning. We want people to keep coming back. YU is known for a place of Torah Umada. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with YU Torah and different places to go ahead and hear about that. But the science and the business part of the institution is also something that's not only relegated to the undergraduate or the graduate schools. Yeshiva University is committed to education throughout people's lives. And we're thrilled to continue to have these interesting sessions on timely and important matters. Last week, some of you may have tuned in to trade and investments related to the Abraham Accords. That was a great discussion. Today's event has a little bit more of a technology piece of it about 5G. 5G, I'm going to let obviously all of our wonderful speakers talk about it, but people throw out these ideas that it's just the same thing as 4G and 3G. And let me tell you, take a look at that big cell tower behind me. It's not. It happens to be quite a bit different. And we've really assembled, I think, a fantastic panel to talk about it. We have two people from Ericsson who have been crushing it. So very excited. Blanka Dalezman actually is a Stern graduate who's going to be our moderator. So we're thrilled to have Blanka moderating and Yossi Cohen speaking to us as well. We have Jason Young from a carrier, or an uncarrier, I should say, from T-Mobile. So a very different perspective about how they're thinking about 5G. A lot of announcements you're seeing in the news, you'll get a little bit more insight from Jason. And then John Ghiradelli. John actually recently joined Macquarie Group. I think everybody has some of their bios in the background. But what you'll see, in addition to leading up some of the digital infrastructure investments for them, John used to be at American Tower. So a tower company, and did some interesting things in data centers, which people might think, why would anyone in a tower business look at a data center? Well, that's part of what 5G and what we're excited to talk about today. So let me pass it off to Blanka to go ahead and begin the discussion.
So really excited to be here. I have been part of the technology group now for maybe almost 2 years. And around the same time, I have been now spending time in 5G, working with carriers, helping them on the system side of the equation, but starting to prep them how to manage this technology, et cetera. So really excited that now we have a session on this topic. Obviously there has been a lot of press around 5G, a lot of sort of questions, a lot of promises. So what we are going to try to do today with the panel is, look at 5G and sort of look at it as, is it just another hyped up technology, right? Or is there more to it than just faster speeds, better connectivity, and lower latency? If we look at sort of the history here and the continuum, we went from 3G, then there was 4G, right? With 4G and the emergence of a smartphone, we changed the way we communicate, but it did not necessarily bring a significant industrial transformation. And so one of the things that we are going to ask the panelists to address is, what's different with 5G, right? What's the promise? with 5G, and what can we expect? So in the next hour, we have a panel of senior executives here from, as Lawrence mentioned, from a tier 1 operator, major telecom supplier, investor. So I'm looking to them to provide us with the what I call the insider's perspective into the 5G revolution. And with that, I don't want to steal the thunder from our panelists. I'm going to turn it over to panelists and start with questions. Now, the first question, I'm going to direct it to Yossi. Once he's finished, I'd invite the other panelists as well to chime in and add. So starting with sort of the, mega question, right? So there has been a lot of hype and a number of different press releases around 5G, both in the US and around the world. And, in addition to there also seems to be a lot of competition. So Yossi, can you provide us with an insight of, what do you see is really going on here, and, what could we expect in this area?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Blanka. I'll try to share a little bit from my my experience and what we are building right now. And yes, I mean, everybody, of course, asked the question. People ask the same question about 3G and 4G. It's 5G is a hype. Why do we need it? It's just another G. I have enough bandwidth in my phone. But I must say that, I mean, you have to understand, first of all, it's not a hype. It's 5G is a platform that is coming in a perfect timing for basically the industrial revolution, what people like to call Industry 4.0, where basically all the technology capabilities that are associated with like smart compute, AI, ML, all this stuff is coming in together. And 5G is when we went into the R&D back 10 years ago, and we said, what is 5G needs to do? That was what was in front of us. We need to create a platform that will allow the usage of this new technologies to basically create the industrial revolution. So it's not a technology that by itself. So I mean, you guys familiar with 3G and 4G, mostly the application that was used was mobile broadband. People want, and then you had some fringe technologies. But when 5G was created, and I will explain later on, it actually from the ground up is supposed to support way more than just mobile broadband applications, but other, for example, Internet of Things, etc., to support the industrial revolution and the creation of this kind of ecosystems. I mean, the new technology will basically provide consumer, businesses, government, unbelievable network connectivity that beyond everything we have seen. And people all the time talk about the peak rates, but you have to remember, maybe you don't need to have a peak rate of 5 gigabit per second, but if you are capable of getting it, it means that 5 people can get 1 gigabit per second. So in terms of the capacity that it will allow per user, just think about what it costs. And also the cost per bit goes down, which brings in more players into the ecosystem to be able to use it, because if the cost is up, the entry bar is much higher. This system is, as I said, by design should support tens of billions of new devices, which 4G, 3G systems are not designed to be able to do that in an efficient way. And basically, in conjunction to the Industry 4.0 revolution, we basically change the way we live, how we work, how we learn. I mean, think about now with what's happening with COVID-19, everybody's sitting at home and learning, but I mean, this platform will allow people to actually work from anywhere in the world seamlessly and be able to use the tools they're using today and tools that they will be developed in the future. Just to give things in perspective, how these Gs are affecting our life. When 4G came in, actually the US was one of the first ones to jump on this carriage and start building in 2010. And that actually created a massive economic shift in the United States. A lot of innovative applications that eventually were spread around the world, products and solutions that are actually using the platform with the limitation it has compared to 5G, eventually create a very vibrant mobile economy that actually contributes more than $450 billion to the GDP in the US and more than 5 million jobs to the US market. So, I mean, just look at what this type of connectivity adds. When it comes to 4G, it was mainly consumer driven. 5G, obviously, table stakes is that we also handle the consumer, but that's where new types of economies and verticals are coming in. like industrials, enterprises, and everything in very, very massive scale. So now if you combine it with technologies that are, as I mentioned before, like IoT, artificial intelligence, cloud networking, AI, VR, basically the 5G platform will enable all these technologies to be everywhere. The low latency and the high throughput and the fact that the network will talk with the application will allow the Industry 4.0 to happen, and will forecast it to unlock $2 trillion in terms of aggregate for GDP growth in the US by 2035. In fact, I mean, I just have to say, I mean, we are in an inflection point. We are very lucky in our life now, lifetime. In terms of technology, a lot of technologies are reaching maturity. For example, I mean, you know all about AR and VR. These glasses I have, it's very soon the form factor and the cost of having it is going down, and the form factor becomes very similar to the glasses I have on my head, and suddenly they will be connected. And this, for example, platform will create additional ecosystem that don't exist today. So today there's a lot of ecosystem on the phone with applications, etc. But you can imagine what can be done when you have virtual reality or augmented reality with your glasses when you go to a retail shop, or when you do gaming, or you just name it. I mean, obviously we actually don't even know all the applications that are going to be on it, but definitely it will create a platform for additional ecosystems. The automotive with self-driving cars basically change the way people are spending their time in the car. They will require to be connected. The car will become a connected platform that will actually also collect information and send it. AI, ML, I mean, everybody using Siri and Cortana and Alexa. I mean, in order to use this, you need to have very low latency. It requires very high connectivity and low latency, as well as edge compute that I'm sure we will talk about later on. All these things are coming together right now. So, and 5G comes at the perfect time to do that, and goes into all industries, video analytics, manufacturing, and basically to be able to support massive IoT in a cost-efficient way. So, I mean, even when 4G came in, we didn't really know 100% of what everything is going to happen. For those of you who are familiar, I'll give you an example just to finish my first speech. I'm pretty sure when 4G was created, because I was there, I'm in the industry for quite some time, no one thought about Pokemon Go as something that will make $1 billion business. But the fact is that Pokemon Go is $1 billion business, shows you that you actually don't know what kind of applications and will create business on the platform you create. And 5G is a much wider, stronger platform that will enable to create way more business than what 4G did. So I hope I answered your question, Blanka, but that's basically the gist of it.
Thank you. Jason, John, would you like to add anything here?
No, I mean, I think we're at a very, you know, some of it's new and some of it's similar to what he mentioned. I think we're at a very pivotal point just in the broader ecosystem and a point of inflection and transformation. 5G is the technology is not the answer in and of itself. It's a wider ecosystem movement, right? That facilitates increased connectivity, increased bandwidth, and the potential hopes of a proliferation of new use cases that, you know, we may or may not know what will happen. And so from my perspective, you know, formerly as a, you know, I guess tower operator, and then more recently as an investor, you know, I think the main thing that when I associate and talk about 5G is the continued need for more infrastructure, right? More towers, more fiber, more data centers to really enable those use cases to transform themselves. And I'll speak a little bit more about some of the details and nuances around that, I think, later in our discussion. But, you know, from being in the industry and being associated with it, I think right now is a very pivotal point with lots of upside over the next, you know, multi-decade period.
Yeah, I think both Yossi and John laid out a great overview of the revolution, the 5G revolution that we're just embarking on. And I've got to say, after hearing both of them talk about where we can go with 5G, I feel a lot better that we're spending $40 billion as T-Mobile to build out our 5G network over the coming years. Lots of upside, that's what I hear. And looking forward to talking a little bit about that as a group here as we go through the discussion.
So kind of picking up on your word upside, right? It seems that there are a lot of compelling market opportunities for 5G, particularly in the enterprise and public sectors that might not have been there with the other Gs before, right? And then, we see efforts around the world from operators trying to transform themselves from pipe providers. And, that has been going on with the other Gs, perhaps not with as much success, to become really enterprise service creators and to move up the value chain in not just providing necessarily, basic connectivity, but providing platform for innovation, as well as then monetizing that, right? So, and I'm going to start with Jason here. What do you see as the key steps for operators that they have to take and, they have to do in order to become what I'd call an innovation partner, right? As opposed to just a pipe provider.
So I think that's a great question. First off, we're of course focused on building out our network, and I could talk for a while about what that looks like, but when I try to talk more specifically to your question, as we're building out our network, we think about we're building a platform. We're building a platform for innovation, and specifically for innovation on 5G. And so to focus on a couple of things that we're doing in connection with that, we have an incubator / accelerator out in Kansas City called the T-Mobile Accelerator. And then we also are a founding member of the 5G Open Innovation Lab out here in Seattle, or as we affectionately call it, Cloud City, with Amazon and Microsoft and Google and others having such a big cloud presence alongside what we're doing. So our 5G Open Innovation Lab, for example, we're partnered with Microsoft, Intel, Amdocs, and others. And it's literally a lab with cohorts coming through. We've got our second cohort now. Lots of different companies looking at many different verticals. And we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we evolve this platform? Right? What do we need to add into our network? What do we need to work with Ericsson, for example, on to continue to put into our network to meet the needs of these entrepreneurs who are laboring to try to bring the next generation of technology and the next generation of value into the ecosystem. So that's one example of what we're doing. Another example is an effort that I lead, which is called our T-Mobile Ventures. We just announced our 5G Innovation Fund last week, actually. So timely for this presentation. And there we're sort of same thing. We're out working our way through the venture ecosystem, talking to institutional VCs, other big corporate VCs, lots of entrepreneurs, and figuring out, okay, how do we help fuel and catalyze development for 5G? And what is that going to mean for us? And I'd say the third thing, and then I'll turn it over to the rest of the panel. The third thing that we're doing, which we've always done a good job at T-Mobile, I believe, is we're listening to our customers. We have had tremendous success, in particular on the consumer side of our business, in what we call the Un-carrier revolution over the last 7 or 8 years. As part of that, we've also dramatically grown our presence in the business space. And we've done that by listening to customers. And what we're hearing customers say is, we're relying on you for connectivity. Connectivity in a 5G world becomes somewhat ubiquitous, right? With these connections, Yossi talked about the ability now to connect lots of different devices and machines to a 5G network in ways that we weren't able to before. The bandwidth and the latency was mentioned earlier. Those are real benefits that when we talk to businesses, they say, hey, we want to do more business with you. What else should we be thinking about, and can we be doing that leverages your 5G network? So a couple of examples there. We're listening to our customers. We're out in the ecosystem. We've got our accelerators and our incubators And we're really thinking about, we're laying all this groundwork for a great platform. What can we do above that that's going to delight our customers?
Thank you. John, Yossi, anything to add to this question?
Yeah, I can definitely agree with what was said. I mean, the industry 4.0 is happening. The enterprise are embarking on a digital transformation. There's going to be spent billions and trillions of dollars in that area. And obviously the connectivity that we have today with Wi-Fi has specific use cases. But as we go into the having like this kind of smart offices, etc., the connectivity will have, as mentioned before, critical. It will be a critical element, and you cannot no longer kind of trust the existing type of technologies for connectivity that are like the best effort. And therefore, for example, 5G, which was designed for it, fits it. I think that I mean, the operators, especially in North America, first of all, they own a very, very precious thing called spectrum that is dedicated, so they definitely leverage on that. And the fact also that 5G also allows between the application developers to talk with the network itself. In order to really utilize it in the best way, the application needs to say to the infrastructure, I need a slice with this type of capabilities. So it will give it to them. From that perspective, it means that the operator with their network, like Jason mentioned, are fundamental part of the business, and they are not anymore just this pipe that some developer is putting on a phone, and he can just leverage the fact that the end users is paying a flat fee. So a big opportunity here.
All right, so I'm going to move to the next question. So the 5G, obviously, we started talking about the 5G ecosystem and the different providers, right, that are required to really drive out the opportunity of this technology. So I'm going to turn this question to John, or start with John, right? What do you see as the opportunities for traditional telecom infrastructure suppliers, right? For example, such as Ericsson, Nokia, American Tower, that have been supplying, the basic infrastructure. Do you see them and others evolving to play a bigger role beyond just what I'd call the connectivity infrastructure?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think the way that I think about it is on two levels, right? So the obvious kind of hardware and software required to enable, 5G, right, is going to change, right? So different types of antennas, different types of baseband units, different configurations, more of a reliance on software and network, virtualization that I think our friends at Ericsson are all over. And so I think from the OEM supplier chain, right, there's obviously new equipment that needs to be created, deployed, and built and then operated. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. I think you're seeing some new entrants in the space, right? So particularly if you look at it in terms of North America, right, the traditional kind of RAN network, radio access network, was dominated and continues to be dominated by Ericsson and Nokia. You've seen, new entrants in terms of Samsung. You've seen Huawei from China get involved. And then you open this up on a global landscape. So I think on that piece, it's very interesting. In terms of the more traditional infrastructure where I spend my time, most of the infrastructure that's existing today was really built around, let's just call it 1G and 2G, right? Which was really around voice, right? Traditional copper wires and then wireless. And then as we've seen the cycles go through, you've seen a natural adoption of more data and video and different types of, I would say, kind of data consumption and creation. And so that's required almost a new wholehearted refresh of the network architecture. And I think 5G and then soon to be 6G and 7G, right, will continue that evolution. So more cell towers, right, because you need more dense networks. You're going to need more spectrum, which the government is continuing to make available, which is more higher band spectrum, which allows for more propagation characteristics attuned to 5G in terms of the low latency, high speed, but you don't have the same distance and coverage that, let's say, 3G or 4G has. The creation of more in-building type assets, smart cities, obviously more data centers, and then the push of pushing more of the data center in terms of the computational storage and compute, more from centralized locations like it has been today to more decentralized locations. So for me, I think it's fantastic, right? And I think each part of the value chain has a role to play. Some of those roles are getting blurred, right? You have new entrants coming in, right, with new spectrum being made available. The likes of Google and Microsoft and Facebook, right, that traditionally used to run over the networks. You've got the very smart and capable guys at T-Mobile, right, continuing to disrupt the industry and think about how they can be more than just pipes to their customers. So I think I get excited just talking about it, and I seem a little bit scatterbrained, right? But there's just so much that's going to change, and it's already changing right now as a result of what people think 5G will happen. I think it's a great space and a very opportune time for every single player in the ecosystem that exists today, and the new folks that are planning on joining us, in the near term.
I'm gonna now open it to also Yossi and Jason. Would you like to add anything? Yossi particularly, since also one of the key infrastructure providers.
Yeah.
Right? How do you see this?
Yeah, no, I think well said. I think you touched most of the points. Obviously, the fact that now most of our equipment is being deployed for the macro layer outdoors, but when we go into the enterprise industries, then there's a lot of opportunity to deploy also indoors. So that's definitely an opportunity. I think all these technologies and these opportunities we mentioned before will require edge compute, low latency, which means that beyond the actual wireless technology, you need to actually have the real estate to put your compute at the right place. This is where tower companies and, for example, the operators have a very, very big advantage, because they actually have real estate that is deployed around very close to the consumer in terms of site. So you put the compute there and suddenly you can do magic. So I think there is a lot of opportunity there to leverage the assets that both the infrastructure providers, the tower companies, and the operators have in order to be a little bit more than just the pipe provider.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think just to get back to what you had said a little bit earlier, Blanka, I think part of the excitement about 5G is we have certain areas, and Yossi and John have mentioned them, right? Edge compute. There's various industrial IoT applications. There are others that we believe there's a lot of opportunity there, but there's also other areas that we just don't know. We don't know what smart developers and entrepreneurs, whether they're here in the US, whether they're over in Europe, Israel, we don't know exactly what they're going to do with this new capacity, with these new capabilities. If you think back to 3G and 4G and LTE, you had, and shifts in hardware that were happening, right? You had some smart person sitting in a garage saying, oh, with a camera and connectivity on the iPhone, I can create this thing that we now all know as Instagram. With the ability to drop a location and track in real time where a car is driving, I can create Uber. And so we have some sense of how 5G, I think at least, how 5G is going to be deployed in a enterprise setting, because enterprise companies have a lot of data. A lot of that data is frankly been pushed into the cloud over the last 5 years. And there's real value in being able to leverage that data and collect data at the edge in increasing real time. And 5G enables that, as Yossi said, right? From a carrier standpoint, that's where we have connectivity, and the faster that is and the lower latency that is, the more valuable it is. But what a set of entrepreneurs are out there thinking about, I'm really excited to see. It's part of why we're involved in the ecosystem, but we're just involved to catalyze. And we win at the end of the day as more and more enterprise customers and more consumers say, oh, look at these great new things I can do on 5G, and move on to that new technology.
You actually almost started to answer my next question. So I'm going to push on this just a little bit more.
I didn't mean to front run you on your question. I just got so excited.
Yeah, no, this is a very exciting space. With 5G, right? And we talked about all the stuff that we don't know, but we could potentially imagine, right? So like, who do you see is going to be out there then driving the new 5G experiences, right? Forge different kinds of partnerships, create new devices, and as a result, right, capture this additional revenue that, we are all anticipating. If you could address, how do you see potentially new internet players, device makers, or other entities to emerge? And since Jason started on this, I'm going to start with Jason and then turn it to Yossi and John.
Okay, I'm sure Yossi and John have much more data and facts on this one, but I'll start. Look, I laid out a case for how we hope to benefit from this 5G build out and revolution, and I think that's a strong case. When I look at the overall market, Yossi talked about some of the massive economic gain that's forecast over the next 4 to 5 years, in the hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of economic gain, and 3, 4, 5 million new jobs just here in the US. So really, really exciting. I think there's going to be additional value also, not just to the established hyperscalers. If you think back to 4G and LTE and all the new business that allowed a Google and an Amazon and a Facebook and others to take 5G with AR and VR, with gaming, with other spaces that these hyperscalers and others are moving into, is really exciting. The last thing I'll say is that from an enterprise standpoint, and I'll get this, kind of direct this back into what we're specifically doing as T-Mobile with our 5G fund, is we're focused on a couple of areas. We're focused on edge. We gave a couple of examples earlier across the panel here of what that involves. We're focused on industrial IoT. Again, lots of connections, lots of ability to do things with data, especially in real time, that we weren't able to do in the past. And then the other two areas that I would highlight that I think will benefit and grow based on this 5G explosion. One is what we call future of work. And that's a time when, and we're living that now, when more and more people are going to be working. This is a little bit like we're in COVID now, so everybody's in a basement or an office, but post-COVID, we can imagine out that far, we would expect the workplace, quote unquote, to not go back to everybody being in an office. So that means there's more mobility, there's more need for connections outside of an office space. And so we think that 5G is going to power a lot of creativity and innovation in that space. And then the last space that I'll highlight, which I know is a big one for us, is security. I talked earlier about companies pushing more and more data into the cloud. Security is first and foremost on their minds. When we go and we sell connections to customers, especially business customers, they want to know, is your network going to be secure? And if we're helping to move data from one place to another, very valuable data, they want to know, is it going to be secure? And so in the venture space, we see a lot of innovation happening in security. We see a lot of innovation happening around new models, protecting APIs, battling against bad actors in the space. It's a cat and mouse game, but 5G opens up so much more data and so many more connections. We think this is going to be a big space. So those are a couple of focus areas that I would highlight.
Thanks, Jason. Turning it over to Yossi.
Yeah, I think before I jump into the hyperscalers and the operators, I think I maybe will give you another perspective. In fact, the 5G your question is like, who is chasing the money, etc., and what's the best way of doing it. In fact, it's beyond the actual companies. It's actually a race that is happening between nations. For example, if you look at China and South Korea, they are putting a lot of investment, and they have deployed 5G way ahead even the US and China, I think more than 1 million 5G base stations that will be deployed. So it's a race between nations, and there is a reason for that. It's not just egos of leaders. It's the fact that this type of technology is an enabler for all this industry, for the zero transformation that eventually will create innovation, application developers, and when you have this platform, all these things, good things will happen. And obviously, just like in the US, they eventually become global. So if your nation is first of having these technologies, your innovation centers and R&D machines around the nation are actually the first one to have access, and they're the first one to develop it, and therefore they have a better chance to be successful and become hyperscalers. And that's more or less kind of just to give you perspective that this is not just who gets more money, it's actually nation fights that is happening. Now, again, in terms of who... in fact, US is a bit behind there. This is an area that the government is recognizing, and there's a lot of effort now to release spectrum and also to enable faster deployment of equipment. But obviously, me as coming from the infrastructure provider, it's never fast enough. In terms of who are the one to forge partnership and who are the players, obviously they are the usual suspects that are today big part of the ecosystem. The hyperscalers are big. I mean, if we said that the enterprise and the industrials are the one where the new money is, where the industrial revolution is going to be, I mean, the hyperscalers are the one talking to the enterprise, and you could see how they are even trying to take their own destiny by themselves. I mean, recently Microsoft has acquired Metaswitch and Affirm, which are infrastructure providers for capabilities like 4G and 5G. And the reason for that is not because they want to come into the business of the infrastructure, because it's not so lucrative if you look at our P&L. It's because they actually want to unleash the upper part of the stack, where it is when it comes to the application that runs on this type of stuff, and they recognize and they want to be part of it, and they want to drive it. So definitely the hyperscalers are there, the operators I don't have to mention, application developers, device manufacturer like Apple, Samsung, but also a lot of manufacturers that are going to leverage the IoT capabilities to develop sensors and cameras and you name it, that will be able to leverage this new technology. So they're all embarking on our doors and talking to us and to operators. And I think the stuff that T-Mobile is doing, etc., trying to nurture the market and give access to this type of technology. So it will create the push and pull that is needed, is actually happening around the world, in the US as well. I think these are the players that are in this game.
And John, I think you are uniquely positioned to also address this question with your...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? The way that I think about it is it's all about data, right? I guess the creation and then the consumption of that data. And in order to basically do those things, right, you need, either spectrum in the air, right, or you need kind of fiber in the ground. And so when you think about what's going to happen in this new world and who's going to win and who's going to lose, I mean, I think it's somewhat silly to predict the future because it's somewhat unknown at this point. But you've got an existing, I say, group of incumbents that are rethinking their business models now that they have different ways to communicate with the end customers. You've got new applications coming up. You've got different, technological advances and business models that are changing, ranging from healthcare to financial to technology to retail. And I think it's all, the way that I view it, is 5G is kind of the great enabler in terms of advancing a lot of these industries going forward. So I'll probably cop out a little bit here, right, in terms of saying, like, I'm unsure, right, in terms of who's ultimately going to win going forward, right? But there's going to be such a great amount of disruption that it should be interesting to kind of follow.
Thank you for that. Now, we have been talking and about the changes, the kind of industrial revolution, and right, 4.0, industry 4.0 changes in enterprise space. Obviously, healthcare, manufacturing, automotive are all sort of prime targets for innovation and for true transformation. Now, what's the opportunity with 5G in the consumer space, right? What other offerings do you think will emerge, right, beyond just the 5G extra capabilities in terms of, better bandwidth, maybe better user experience? Where do you see the consumer opportunity? And since Jason works for an operator, I'm going to start with him.
All right. Look, we see all sorts of opportunity in the consumer space, and it's one of the reasons that we pushed really hard to merge with Sprint, which we did earlier this year. That allowed us to build out our 5G network even faster with more spectrum. And so what you see now is we have a nationwide dedicated 5G network, which for a consumer, as consumers continue this upgrade cycle, the iPhone, of course, is now a 5G enabled iPhone, just means consumers are going to be taking advantage of 5G even faster than maybe we thought earlier this year. So I guess the resonant point there is we've built our network to be a nationwide 5G network. And within that, I would just highlight a couple of areas, and then maybe Yossi or John has some additional thoughts. I think AR and VR, or XR as it's sometimes called, has all sorts of opportunity. We've been talking about it as an industry for many years. Again, with 5G, with the connectivity, with the bandwidth, with the price per megabyte dropping, what a great opportunity for AR and VR, and for bringing that not just into consumer applications, but also into business applications, in particular AR, where you're able to, for example, enable a plumber to see through a glass how to fix a pipe that he or she has never fixed before. So I think AR and VR, there's tremendous possibility there. Gaming is another area that we expect to benefit tremendously from this step up into 5G. You see Microsoft, as well as some of the other big gaming companies, moving pretty aggressively into mobile for gaming. So Microsoft, of course, has their xCloud, which they've recently launched, and they're pushing games into the out into the cloud to be accessed via mobile. Google, as well, with Stadia, has done the same thing. So we think that that's another tremendous opportunity, not just for gaming companies, but for consumers to get an even better experience than what they've had in the past through 5G. Those are two. I have a few others that come to mind. Those are the first two, and I'd love to hear from John or Yossi what else they're excited about.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I agree. I think very good description that Jason took, and really pointing out on the main thing. I think, obviously, as I said, the table stakes for 5G is also being provided enhanced mobile broadband. And you can already see, and I give you an example just from recent weeks that actually touched some of the stuff that Jason said. I mean, the iPhone 12 came up with a new technology called LiDAR. And this new technology is actually designated to be used for augmented reality. That's why it's there. And suddenly there is a component inside a device that probably half of this country is going to have in the next year or so, that is supporting augmented reality. So you can already see how the industry is preparing for it, and this is a mass distributed device. And this component that is inside the phone will have APIs that the application developer can use. So now just think about how many application developers are going to sit down and come up with applications that none of us has ever thought about, and going to try and make money out of it. This is just an example how everything is connected. But if you just had the component, it's not enough, because if you had the connectivity that doesn't allow you to low latency, for those of you who have ever tried, to use augmented reality or virtual reality glasses with a high latency, you get dizzy very quickly. It doesn't work. It's the user experience just doesn't fly. But that's the whole idea. Then when all these things come together, then suddenly you have an application that people wants to pay for it. Also in the consumer, there is scale. Let's be honest. I mean, if you're successful there, the scale goes back very quickly, which is a much, I would say, more tempting. Enterprise is a much more difficult market to get into, as much as the money is big there. So I'm definitely supporting everything you said. I can mention more. I mean, I mentioned before the Cortana, Siri, all these kind of personal users are going to become smarter and smarter and smarter. More people are going to use them because they are going to be smarter. I don't know if you guys know, but they're significantly smarter than compared to when they were launched. And I think in the next 10 years where 5G is going to be there, this device, these capabilities will allow you to actually really be able to use this personal assistant a better way. Again, but if it answers you in a slow time, you're not going to use it. So you need it. Camera analytics. I mean, people used to put a lot of sensors. No one wants to do that anymore. So you put a high resolution camera that costs $100, and then you have analytics on the edge that basically tells you what is happening and recognize if something goes wrong. For millions of applications, all this stuff, you need to have high throughput, again, that requires 5G and edge compute that sits very close to where the radio equipment is. So I think opportunities are enormous, just to answer your question.
John, would you like to add anything, or you are on mute?
The only thing that I think that I would add in terms of where I get super excited is, 5G is enables, I think, a path towards ubiquitous connectivity. And if you have, in theory, ubiquitous connectivity with high speed, high throughput, high bandwidth, I think it really throws into question geography, right? And I think you're seeing that now with the work from home, and I think that's only going to get further disrupted, right? As this technology and this connectivity universe kind of dials itself in. And so how people interact, where they live, how they move, how they transport from one location to another, how they buy, how they consume, whether that's through, AR, VR, whether that's through machine learning and the likes. I think it's going to be mind blowing, right? And I think that's really how I think about the world, is just you're having, inanimate and maybe unmobile objects, and even now mobile objects, be connected to each other. And what happens when that is enabled? That's kind of like Pandora's box to a certain extent. I've been in the same location for the past 6 months and have functioned, very, very well, right? Have basically, changed jobs, bought a house, and had a baby, right? And I've been able to do that all with, the benefits of having this connectivity world and what I would say in a 4G environment. So imagine what that could be and what can happen when it becomes 5G. So I don't think it's kind of rise of the machines in a Terminator type aspect, but I think it's going to be very interesting what the future holds in terms of all these devices and data seamlessly connected and interchanging. And it's going to, I think, upend both consumers and enterprises, one and the same.
Yeah, just one last thing to add. And John, I don't know, with 5G, maybe it's triplets, 2 houses. Like, I don't know what you could have done with 5G. But
yeah.
What you also just think about, super traditional businesses, right? So home broadband, everybody has home broadband. And for forever, at least as long as I can remember, if you want to have home broadband, you buy it from your cable provider. Maybe you get DSL, but most people have a cable provider, and it's a wire into your home, and it's a wire out of the wall and, the living room or the basement or wherever you have it. And frankly, every time that John, you probably went through this when you moved into your new house, like you have to have somebody come out and install it and do this and do that. In a 5G world, do you really need that anymore? Or could you go to a T-Mobile or one of our competitors and just say, hey, I'll take this puck, I'll bring it home, I'll plop it in my living room, and now I've got home broadband. That's not rocket science in terms of a new technology, but it could be extremely disruptive in the industry if you think about what that could mean. So just wanted to highlight, we've talked a lot about some new technologies and new examples. Even for traditional businesses, that's very disruptive, and that has ripple effects into the content space and and other spaces. So wanted to throw that in before the next question, Blanka.
So we're actually running here close to top of the hour. So I'm gonna cut off my questions here and open it up to the audience so we get a chance to address some of their questions as well.
I think one of the questions maybe I'll ask on behalf of Ronan, who's asking, I think, a little bit more granular detail to understand the actual architecture of 5G. I think people talked about that those big cell towers that people saw were a 1G, 2G kind of phenomenon. And now we're hearing that there's a whole new architecture needed for 5G. People talk about small cells a little further down. They talk about maybe fiber connecting to towers where they hadn't beforehand. They talk about maybe little edge data centers close to the towers, because everyone's talked about the need for storage at the edge or compute at the edge. I don't know, maybe John, you want to tackle that first in terms of, as an investor in digital infrastructure, what are the new pieces that are being built and people are spending money on in terms of the infrastructure? And if people were interested in the companies and who's out there, are these public companies, are these private companies? Who's out there in case people are curious about that? And I think that's probably our time for our last question. I try to be tight in our hour. So if John, maybe you could start it off and then we'll go through everybody quickly.
Yeah, I'll hit it real quick and then turn it over to my colleagues on the panel. I think at the basic level, which I talked about, increased data, increased, throughput, bandwidth is going to require more physical assets. In my mind, it's a logistics problem. Similarly to what you've seen with transporting water, transporting humans with airports and railroads, right? The more data that's moving bidirectionally in and out, storage, created, consumed, requires more physical layers for it to kind of run through. And so obviously when we're in a 3G, 4G world, you've seen a linear increase, I guess, in both towers and fiber. I think of the world in terms of kind of the trifecta, right? Towers, fiber, data centers. That's kind of like the three things that you need to provide almost any type of service that enables T-Mobile to provide what they their network to their consumers. Ericsson is creating all the devices to enable that. So going forward, you're going to see more towers. You're going to see more towers, where they can't be tall and far apart, more condensed, which is really what small cells are, right? As you guys walk around New York City or dense urban areas, you start to see antennas pop up all over the place. And that's just what I would call a very mini tower, right? That is basically fed by fiber and propagating the signal via spectrum. So more fiber, you're going to see a lot more fiber in the ground, right? I think, and so the technology around fiber, the density of fiber is going to increase. And then ultimately, over the past 10 years, we've seen a tremendous amount of new data centers get built. And you've got the incumbents that are doing this. So on the data center side, you've got Equinix, Digital Realty, CoreSite, CyrusOne, that are all public companies. On the tower side, you've got public companies in terms of American Tower, Crown Castle, SBA. You've got folks like the operators, right? T-Mobile, and then their international peers that also own and build and develop parts of that infrastructure to enable their ecosystem to exist. And so I think if you look at it, and I'm happy to have follow-up conversations offline after this, Lawrence, with folks that are interested, right? Because it really takes a need to do a deep dive on the architecture of the digital infrastructure space, where it's at, where it's going to need to go, and the convergence that may be enabled by 5G. But I guess the high level takeaway is we're going to need more infrastructure, right? Bar none, which should be good for everybody. And whether that's incumbents that are providing that infrastructure or new entrants that provide that infrastructure, that's always going to be TBD.
Yeah, maybe I can chime in and try to answer some of your questions there associated with the small cells, etc. I think 5G, in order to provide this immense bandwidth, is leveraging a natural resource called spectrum. And in order to provide 5 gigabit per second, 10 gigabit per second, etc., you need to have a large chunk of spectrum. As much as the radio technologies are advanced and the technology we use in Ericsson and our competitors are trying to maximize the use of the radio in order to get the highest throughput and the efficiency, it's still you need high spectrum, by chunks of spectrum in order to do that, and they usually exist as you go upper in the spectrum. And if you go upper in the spectrum, for example, like millimeter wave or C-band, you eventually end up with the propagation that is lower, shorter than the propagation that you use in the previous spectrum that are lower. And therefore, you need to start creating more cells, smaller ones, that are closer to the consumer so they can actually enjoy throughput. And therefore, as Johnny mentioned, you will need more infrastructure to be able to enable that.
Excellent. And Jason, maybe I'll let you take the cherry on top. Now acquiring Sprint, the amount of spectrum. People think about you do a deal like that because you're buying subscribers, but the network assets and most importantly the spectrum assets, even back from the Nextel MMDS combined with Sprint and Nextel, we're able to have. You're now at the wonderful beachfront property of a lot of spectrum, to Yossi's point.
Yeah, and without turning this into an advertisement for T-Mobile, I will say, yes, we have a lot of spectrum now. We've got low band, mid band, and then Yossi was also talking about high band. So just tremendous assets, combined assets now across all three of those bands. And the other thing that I'll point out is that from a capacity standpoint, we've talked a lot about the need for more capacity and how all this is going to grow, demands for data, et cetera. Spectrum, and I'm no spectrum expert, but spectrum, if you have the right bands and they complement one another, it's not just taking 1 + 1. There's a multiplicative effect of being able to line up, assets that are complementary. And so just as an example, our capacity on our network within the next several years will be 14 times what our capacity was in the pre-merged T-Mobile, so the standalone T-Mobile. So really exciting in terms of what that looks like for all the things that we were talking about on this great call. Lots of demand, lots of incredible opportunity, especially for entrepreneurs and for companies that are in this space. So thanks for having me and really appreciate the opportunity to talk about that.
Thank you so much, Jason, John, Yossi, Blanka. It was a great discussion. We covered a lot of ground, the application side of it and network slicing and what can do for businesses and consumers all the way to infrastructure and spectrum. An important, timely conversation. Really appreciate it. Again, for everybody, Yeshiva University has been spending a tremendous amount of time and effort to rebuild their technology program, their computer science areas, both on the undergraduate and on the master's levels, as well as in the finance with Noam Wasserman, the new dean of Sci-Sims. And we really ask everybody involved over here, if you can be a mentor for the YU students. You have internships over the year or in the summertime. Love to have our students get an opportunity to work with you. And with that, we again thank all of the panelists very much for a great conversation, and we look forward to everyone having a great week. Please go out and vote, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
Hey, thanks so much.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Billy's great.
Bye-bye.